Imagine walking through a museum, staring at the familiar faces of early humans, Neanderthals, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, each skull carefully labeled. Each one neatly placed in a timeline that supposedly explains how we modern Homo sapiens came to be. But then, hidden in the glass cases of history, are fragments of something that doesn't fit. Skulls to strange, bones to unusual, entire species that scientists once thought couldn't possibly exist. And yet, the fossils are right there, staring back at us. Tonight, we race stepping into a forgotten chapter of human evolution, a chapter that reveals the human species that shouldn't exist, but somehow did. These weren't myths or legends, they were real, living beings that shared this planet with us. And the story of their existence is stranger than science fiction. The first discovery takes us deep into the island caves of Flores in Indonesia, where archaeologists uncovered something that instantly challenged everything we thought we knew about human evolution. The bones were small, shockingly small, at first glance. It looked like the remains of a child. But the skeleton told a different story. This wasn't a child at all, but a fully grown adult, standing barely 3 feet tall, with a tiny skull no larger than a grapefruit. This being was given the name Homo floresiensis, but the world knows them better as the hobbits of humanity. The discovery sent shockwaves through the scientific community. How could a species of humans, so small and primitive-looking, have lived only 50,000 years ago? To put that into perspective, while Neanderthals were vanishing in Europe, these tiny humans were thriving on a remote island, surviving alongside giant lizards and prehistoric beasts. They made tools, they hunted, and they adapted to a world that should have crushed them. Scientists tried to explain it away at first, suggesting it might have been a deformity, perhaps a modern human with a genetic disorder, but the evidence piled up. Entire groups of these small humans once lived here. Their existence undeniable, a human species that simply shouldn't exist but did. And Flores isn't the only place with secrets. Thousands of miles away, in the mountains of the Philippines, another shocking discovery came to light: Homo luzonensis. Their teeth and bones were unlike anything scientists had ever seen. Curved fingers suggested climbing abilities more suited to apes. Their feet looked primitive, almost like they were built to live in the trees. But their teeth, they were unmistakably human. It was as if evolution had twisted two separate paths together, creating a species that seemed like it belonged in the distant past, yet lived only tens of thousands of years ago. Once again, the neat timeline of human evolution was shattered. And then there's the species that has become the stuff of pure controversy, the Denisovans. And like the hobbits of Flores, they weren't discovered through a full skeleton. In fact, 4 years. All scientists had were fragments of finger bone, a tooth, and later a jaw. Yet those tiny pieces revealed something extraordinary. DNA testing showed that Denisovans weren't Neanderthals, and they weren't us. They were something entirely different. They existed alongside humans, interbreeding with our ancestors, leaving genetic fingerprints that still exist in people today. If you have ancestry in parts of Asia or Oceania, you may be carrying Denisovan DNA right now. It's almost unsettling. A species we never even knew existed still lives on inside us. They shouldn't exist, not according to the old charts we memorized in school. But the fossils and our very DNA tell a story that's impossible to ignore. And if that wasn't bizarre enough, the discoveries keep getting stranger. Deep in South Africa, in a labyrinth of caves, scientists uncovered what might be the most mysterious human relative of all, Homo naledi. Their bodies were small. Their brains far smaller than ours, about the size of an orange, by all accounts. They should have been simple, primitive, incapable of complex behavior. Yet the evidence suggested otherwise. The bones were deliberately placed, as if these beings were burying their dead. That would make Homo naledi one of the earliest humans to practice ritual behavior. Something once thought to be unique to us, a species with the brain of a chimpanzee, but the instincts of a modern human. That's not just strange, it's terrifying. It suggests that intelligence and culture don't necessarily require a brain like ours. It means the spark of humanity, the ability to create meaning, ritual, even belief might have existed in beings we'd never even recognize as human. And here's the part that truly haunts scientists. None of these discoveries are that old. We're not talking millions of years ago, we're talking tens of thousands, meaning that when our ancestors walked the earth, they weren't alone. They shared forests, caves, and islands with beings that looked human, but weren't. Some were tiny, others were towering. Some were closer to us than Neanderthals. And some were so different they seemed like a glitch in the evolutionary system. So the question becomes, how many of these impossible humans once existed? How many species that shouldn't exist are still waiting to be discovered? And more disturbingly, how many of them might have survived far longer than we think? The fossil record is then fragile and full of gaps. If an entire species like the Denisovans could exist without us ever knowing until recently, what else might be hiding in caves, buried under jungle floors, or deep beneath the ocean's edge? The unsettling truth is that human history isn't clean or linear. It's a chaotic, branching tree full of dead ends, strange experiments, and beings that blur the very definition of what it means to be human. As we step deeper into this story, we'll uncover just how bizarre and haunting these human relatives were, and how their deaths, fossils, and legacies tell us a story of survival, extinction, and mystery. A story that whispers a disturbing truth: the human species that shouldn't exist, did. And their shadows still linger in our DNA, and maybe, just maybe, in places science hasn't yet looked. When we think of human evolution, we picture a simple ladder. First, something ape-like, then a little more upright, eventually Neanderthals, finally us Homo sapiens, clean, tidy, inevitable. But the fossils tell us a different story. They don't line up neatly like rungs on a ladder. They branch, twist, overlap, and sometimes double back on themselves like a maze with no clear exit. And right there in the middle of that maze, we keep finding creatures that simply shouldn't be there. Take the Denisovans again. When the first finger bone fragment was found in Siberia's Denisova cave, scientists almost didn't notice it. To the naked eye, it was nothing special. Just another fossil buried in the dirt. But DNA testing revealed something shocking. This bone didn't belong to a Neanderthal, and it didn't belong to us. It belonged to a species of human we had never even imagined. And when the genetic code was unraveled, something even stranger emerged. This unknown human had interbred with both Neanderthals and modern humans. It's a chilling thought. We don't just carry memories of them in our fossil record, we carry pieces of them in our blood. Their DNA is in us, still shaping our immune systems, our high-altitude endurance, even subtle aspects of how our bodies work. A ghost species living on inside us, hidden until modern science pulled it into the light. But Denisovans weren't the only ghosts. In the high mountains of Tibet, a massive jawbone was uncovered, thick and powerful, with teeth built for a life of endurance. DNA linked it back to Denisovans, suggesting they weren't confined to Siberia at all. They ranged across Asia, thriving in environments that should have been impossible for humans to survive in. It raises unsettling questions. If Denisovans adapted to high altitudes long before we did, what else were they capable of? Did they build societies? Did they have languages we'll never hear? And perhaps the darkest question, did they disappear because of us? Because history suggests one pattern: whenever these impossible humans shared land with us, they eventually vanished. Was it competition? Did we push them into extinction? Or did we absorb them? Did their identities dissolve into ours, leaving behind nothing but fragments of bone and traces of DNA? And then, there are discoveries that push this mystery even further. In the cave systems of South Africa, Homo naledi forces us to rethink what being human even means. These beings lived about 250,000 years ago, which means they existed at the same time as early Homo sapiens. Their brains were tiny, 1/3 the size of ours. By evolutionary logic, they should have been incapable of complex thought. But the caves tell a different story. The bones of Homo naledi were found deep in underground chambers, placed there intentionally. These weren't random scatterings. It looked like burial, deliberate disposal of their dead. Think about what that means. For years, scientists believed ritual behavior, symbolic thought, and awareness of death were unique to humans with big brains. But here was a species that seemed almost primitive, practicing something profoundly human, a brain the size of a chimpanzee's, and yet an instinct for ceremony, for meaning, for something beyond survival. It shouldn't exist. And yet it does. Even more chilling are the details that surfaced as excavations continued. Scratch marks on the cave walls suggested they were capable of using fire in the pitch-black darkness, navigating the depths with a skill and purpose we still don't understand. These weren't accidents. These weren't random falls into hidden chambers. They were making choices that hinted at culture, community, maybe even belief. And then, on the tiny island of Flores, the so-called hobbits add another layer of strangeness. Imagine standing face to face with a human being no taller than your waist. Their heads were small, their brains even smaller. Yet they made stone tools sharp enough to hunt and butcher animals. They survived on an island swarming with predators, including giant Komodo dragons, and they thrived there for hundreds of thousands of years. It's unsettling because we think intelligence and brain size go hand in hand. But the hobbits proved that wasn't true. They lived and adapted in ways we still can't explain. And what happened to them? Did we arrive, as we so often did, and outcompete them? Did they vanish on their own, or something scientists hesitate to ask? Did early humans meet them, interact with them, even live alongside them longer than we think? Because scattered legends across Indonesia speak of small, human-like beings living in the forests, creatures described with uncanny accuracy. Most dismiss these stories as myth. But the fossil record suggests they might have been memories, fragments of encounters passed down across generations. Long after the species themselves had disappeared, the unsettling truth is that every new discovery adds a new branch to the human tree. Instead of a straight line, we see dozens of experiments in evolution, some lasting millions of years, others vanishing in the blink of an eye. And many of them challenge our assumptions of what it means to be human. If small-brained hobbits could make tools, if Homo naledi could bury their dead, if Denisovans could survive where even we would struggle, then what does that say about us? Are we truly unique? Or are we simply the last survivors of a much larger family that should never have existed in the first place? But here's where it gets darker. The fossil record is incomplete. For every bone we've uncovered, there are countless more still buried, waiting. And sometimes, even the bones aren't needed to tell the story. Scientists studying human DNA keep finding strange signatures, genetic traces that don't match any known species. Ghost lineages. Evidence of entire human species that must have existed, but whose fossils we have never found. In other words, there are species out there, lost cousins of ours that we know existed, but that remain invisible to history. That means the hobbits, the Denisovans, the naledi, they might just be the beginning. We could be standing on a planet that once teemed with other kinds of humans, species that shouldn't exist, and yet did. Some left bones, some left DNA, and some left only whispers in our myths. And as strange as that is, the strangest part may be this: their disappearance is still a mystery. Did nature wipe them out? Or did we? Did Homo sapiens, armed with intelligence and cooperation, become not just survivors, but conquerors? Did we erase every trace of them to ensure that only one kind of human remained? Ourselves. And yet, even after all that, their shadows remain. In the caves, in the fossils, in our blood, reminders that the story of humanity is not a straight path, but a haunted forest full of strange figures that walk just out of sight. Figures that shouldn't exist, but once did, and perhaps, in ways we don't yet understand, still do. When you picture the past, it's tempting to imagine emptiness. Vast plains, untouched forests, silent caves. But the truth is, the world was crowded not with cities or roads, but with other kinds of us. Creatures that looked human enough to unsettle, but different enough to disturb. And with every fossil unearthed, the crowd gets denser. One of the most unsettling discoveries came from the Philippines. In 2007, deep inside Kala Cave, archaeologists found fragments of bones. At first glance, they looked human: a foot bone, some teeth, a finger, small, almost childlike. But closer inspection revealed something stranger. These bones didn't match any known species. They weren't Homo sapiens. They weren't hobbits. They weren't Neanderthals. They belonged to something new, Homo luzonensis, the Luzon humans. Shouldn't have existed. They were tiny, like the hobbits, but their teeth and bones carried a confusing mix of traits. Some features looked ancient, like something from our earliest ancestors 2 million years ago. Others seemed advanced, closer to modern humans. It was as if time itself had folded in on this species, trapping them between worlds. And the strangest part, they lived just 67,000 years ago. That's shockingly recent. They were alive while Neanderthals walked the earth, while Denisovans survived in Asia, while our own species was spreading across the globe. For years, the Philippines was thought to be unreachable without boats. How did these small humans get there? Did they build rafts? Did they drift across the ocean by accident? The fact that they existed at all rewrote the rules. Imagine it, an island, isolated from the rest of the world, inhabited by a community of tiny humans. For generations, they lived, hunted, gathered, and adapted. And then, one day, they vanished, leaving behind only a handful of bones to prove they were ever real. But Luzon is just one island. What if there were more? What if the oceans of Southeast Asia once sheltered multiple lost human species, each adapted to their own hidden world, each leaving faint shadows of existence that we've only just begun to uncover? And then there are the Neanderthals. And like hobbits or Luzonensis, they feel almost familiar. They were tall, strong, intelligent. They painted caves, crafted tools, made ornaments out of bone and shell. They buried their dead, sometimes even with flowers. For years, we told ourselves they were brutes, slow, dim, destined to be replaced by us. But now we know better. They weren't our enemies. They were us, in so many ways. Genetic studies reveal that we didn't just cross paths with Neanderthals, we mingled with them. Today, every person outside Africa carries about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. It's in our skin, our immune systems, our very biology. And yet, they're gone. Why? The answer remains one of the darkest mysteries in human history. Did we outcompete them? Did we spread diseases they couldn't resist? Or did their population slowly collapse under the pressure of climate change, dwindling until the last group vanished into silence? Whatever the cause, one thing is clear: they shouldn't have disappeared. And yet, they did. The unsettling truth is that extinction isn't rare, it's the rule. For every human species that ever lived, we are the exception, the survivors. But survival may have come at a cost, because lurking in our DNA are signs of something even stranger. When scientists analyzed the genetic code of Denisovans, they found traces of another species hidden inside them. Not Neanderthal, not modern human, something older, something unknown. It suggests Denisovans themselves interbred with another mysterious branch of humanity, one we've never seen in the fossil record. No bones, no caves, no tools. Just genetic whispers of a species that must have walked this earth, a human that shouldn't exist. Think about that for a moment. We know they existed, but we have no idea what they looked like. No idea how they lived, or where. They are a shadow, a phantom relative still written into the very code of life. And if one ghost species left a mark that clear, how many others might still be hidden? How many kinds of humans once lived and died, leaving nothing but silence in their wake? The timeline of humanity starts to look less like a straight story and more like a crowded stage. Picture it, 50,000 years ago, our ancestors stepped into a world already occupied. Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, hobbits in Indonesia, Luzon humans in the Philippines, Homo naledi in Africa, and us, just one species among many. Not special, not inevitable, just another branch on the tree. But one by one, the branches snapped, and only ours remained. It's easy to tell ourselves that makes us chosen, destined, the winners of evolution. But what if it's darker than that? What if our survival wasn't destiny at all, but violence? What if the very reason we exist today is because we erased everyone else? Not through one great war, but slowly, quietly, through competition, through dominance, through survival at their expense. And yet, their presence still lingers. The Neanderthal in our genes. The Denisovan traits in the people of Tibet. The echoes of hobbits in island folklore. They may be gone, but we carry them inside us, living reminders of a time when humanity was plural, not singular. What unsettles scientists most is how recent some of these extinctions are. Neanderthals vanished only 40,000 years ago. Hobbits may have survived until 50,000 years ago, maybe even later. Luzon humans were alive just 67,000 years ago. That's the blink of an eye in evolutionary time. Which leads to a haunting question: what if not all of them are gone? In remote jungles, in caves yet unexplored, in islands that remain untouched, could some remnant have survived, hidden from us? It sounds impossible. But then again, so did hobbits. So did Luzonensis. So did naledi. Each one was a discovery no one believed until the bones were in our hands. We like to think we know the story of humanity. But the truth is, it's not a single story at all. It's a shattered mirror, each piece showing a reflection we barely recognize. Some reflections are familiar, others distorted, others almost monstrous. Together, they form a picture that is far stranger than we ever imagined. A picture that suggests we are not alone in what we were, only alone in what we became. And as we continue digging, searching, piecing together this puzzle, we may find that the most unsettling part isn't what we've already discovered. It's what still lies buried. Because if history has taught us anything, it's this: every time we think we've mapped the boundaries of humanity, another fossil emerges from the earth to prove us wrong. Another reminder that the human species that shouldn't exist, did. And maybe, just maybe, still does.